We travel once again to 1943 in our horror retrospective. This time, Bela Lugosi dons his famous cape once again when Johnnie Torch reviews Return of the Vampire. It's hard to believe that Bela Lugosi only legitimately played his iconic version of Dracula in 2 films. Todd Browning's original 1931 classic, Dracula, and several years later in another of my all-time favorites, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello Meet Frankenstein. Lugosi was effective in evoking his Dracula character in many films, however, but probably most notably in Return of the Vampire. Many have cited that he plays Dracula in all but name in this film, which is of course due to Universal holding the rights to Dracula, and this film was made for Columbia. But a rose by any other name and all that allows us to see Lugosi once more play the role that made him a legend. And indeed, if I have a headcanon of a sort for these films, I certainly find this film a more suitable sequel for the original Dracula than the official sequel, Dracula's Daughter. The film was directed by Lou Landers, who had previously made The Raven starring both Lugosi and Boris Karloff. Filmed at the height of World War II, like most films back in the day, it reflects the then-current climate of the world. If you look at popular films from that era, everyone from Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes to Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan aided the war effort by taking on the Nazis. While this film doesn't go so far as to have the vampire working for Schicklgruber, it certainly comes across as a period piece. Lugosi plays Armand Tesler, who wrote the book on vampirism, eventually becoming a vampire himself. Filling his Renfield role is his helpless lackey, Andreas, whom Tesla has somehow used his vampire powers to turn into a werewolf. He's played by Matt Willis, whose resemblance to Lon Chaney Jr. must be wholly coincidental. Of course, The Wolfman had come out a few years earlier in 1941 to great success. The makeup used here is not quite as refined and iconic, but suitable enough. Unlike traditional depictions of a werewolf, Andreas doesn't revert to the mind of an animal, but his condition is used as a metaphor for his own moral deficiencies. He's saved from his fate by Lady Jane Ainsley, played by the stoic Frida Inzencourt, who rehabilitates him after she and her colleague drive a stake through Tesla's heart during World War I. Lady Jane makes for an enjoyable protagonist. It was unique at the time to have a matron as the scientist heroine of the story, and it's a very refreshing choice. Her role would go on to inspire Grayson Hall's Dr. Julia Hoffman several years later in the classic series Dark Shadows. Several years later, the vampire returns, and as you might expect, a vampire needs a pretty neck to sink his teeth into, and in this case, the lovely Nina Falk, who plays Nikki, supplies same. Nikki's engaged to Lady Jane's son, John, before succumbing to Tesla's will. Nina appeared in film classics such as Spartacus and An American in Paris. She's probably best remembered for her role as Moses' adoptive mother opposite Charlton Heston in DeMille's eternal holiday classic, The Ten Commandments. Lady Jane eventually finds a confidant in her battle against the Undead in the skeptical Scotland Yard detective Sir Frederick Fleet, played by Miles Mander. Miles had a long career playing in some of Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes films, as well as the horror classics 1943's Phantom of the Opera and The Picture of Dorian Gray. Also in a small role as a detective is character actor William Austin, who was the first actor to ever play Alfred Pennyworth in the original Batman serial. As a Christian, I've always liked the classic vampire genre for the respect it shows Christianity. The vampire fears the cross and is helpless in its presence. Nowadays, the modern vampire story tends to move away from the cross's power like a vampire avoids sunlight. Political correctness strikes again. But I think this film is probably the most reverential to Christianity of all classic vampire films. Not only does it have the usual trappings of the cross's power over the vampire, but in the film's finale, the mortally wounded werewolf Andreas recovers a crucifix given to him by Lady Jane, which stirs him to once again reclaim his lost humanity. Andreas saves the day by dragging the unconscious Tesla into the sunlight, leading to a very effective special effects shot of Tesla deteriorating in the sun. Unlike Universal's typical stop-motion disintegration effects, this shot was accomplished by melting a wax figure of Lugosi. Released in November of 1943, Return of the Vampire narrowly lost to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which was released in March of 1943, as the first Monster Mash crossover film. But I believe it was the first to feature both a vampire and werewolf in the same film, a tradition that of course continues on to this day. With a solid cast giving great performances, including the great Bela Lugosi, who for all intents returns to his most iconic role, Return of the Vampire is a film definitely worth checking out and adding to any classic horror movie marathon. Sadly, the film hasn't been available for wide release on DVD or Blu-ray. However, you can find it periodically on Turner Classic Movies, if you keep a vigilant eye. I'm giving Return of the Vampire 4.5 stars out of 5. This is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.